Once your project has come out of the bisque firing, it's ready to be glazed, but there's a little prep work that's required to get before you can glaze it. One thing you need to do is you want to wax the bottom of your pot if you have any deep crevices. For example, even writing your name in the bottom, or maybe a trimming tool that had a mark, or any kind of extra piece of clay maybe got stuck on, can cause a little crevice where your glaze can get stuck, and we need no glaze on the bottom. So we'll use the wax to clog the pores of the bisqueware and to make sure that no glaze gets stuck in there. Be very careful to not get it on your hands or drip it on your pot in any way. So we just dip and we kind of blot it into the deep crevices. And once you do this, you're going to want to wait 1 day before, or a good amount of time so that it's dry before you get it into the glaze. Once you're done with that, you can start preparing your glazing directions so that when you're ready to glaze, you get all the materials out that you need. When you're planning your glazing, you have a number of options. You can pour the inside, dip the outside, and dip the lip in up to 2 glazes. Or you can dip it 3/4 of the way to one side and the other side and kind of get a stripe down the middle using 2 different glazes. Or you can dip half, dip half, dip half, and get 3 different glazes inside and outside around the pot. You want to decide how you want to glaze it based on how you can hold the pot, as well as to match the form of the pot. Then you can start picking out your glazes. When choosing glazes, you want to make sure that they match in color. For example, the tones of the colors matching to please for you and for your piece. You want to make sure they match in opacity or translucency. Opaque glazes mean you can't see maybe if you have marks on your piece or textures you don't like, whereas translucent glazes will enhance those textures and really make them show. You also want to make sure that the glazes match in glossiness or mateness. Now, by matching, I don't mean they have to be exact, but you don't necessarily want a very matte glaze or a dull glaze with a glossy or shiny glaze. Lastly, you want to think about the visual texture, which is basically whether whether the glaze has speckles or a variety to its color. Some are very plain and some have a lot of variety. Once you decide 2 glazes that you think will go together, and you think about where you want to place them on the pot by pouring the inside, dipping the outside, and dipping the lip, or dipping 3/4, dipping 3/4, whatever technique you're going to use, you want to plan that out and run it by the teacher just to make sure that everything's going to work. After you're done with that, you have your plans, you have your wax pot, you're going to be ready to glaze. Once you have your bisque-fired pot, it's waxed and the wax is dried, you have your glazing directions, then you're going to be ready to glaze. Before you even touch your glazes, you always want to make sure that you wear your safety goggles. And you want to always carry your buckets by the bucket with 2 hands so you don't slosh them around or dump them accidentally. You're going to want to use a different spoon for each glaze, and you're going to want to stir everything off the bottom, out of the corners, really make sure you got everything mixed up in a good solution. And to pour the inside, you're going to need a measuring cup. Once you've stirred and you've got all of your materials, then you're ready to follow your directions. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pour the inside with the Sang de Boeuf. This particular, and that's just this particular glaze. When you go to pour it inside, you're going to have to pour, you're going to want to pour the inside so that you get the whole inside. So you kind of want to do this curling motion. Okay, so practice it a few times until you feel comfortable with it. And once you feel comfortable, then you're ready to re-stir and pour the inside. Scoop. Nice good grip. Pour. And then immediately you want to pour it out as evenly as possible. Allow it to stay upside down so that it dries, because if you turn it right side up too fast, a drip can go down the side and you don't want that. You can feel free to peek, and if you've missed a section, you're going to need to paint that in with a glaze brush with 3 to 5 coats. And you'll want to do that before you move on to the next step. Whenever you're painting glaze on, you want to do nice even coats, and you want to make sure you don't go over other areas that you did get glaze on. Next, you're going to dip the outside. Go back to check your notes, make sure you're using the right glaze. And in my directions tell me to dip the outside again in the sang de boeuf. I re-stir to make sure I have a good consistency on the glaze. Basically, if you lift the spoon out, all the holes should pop. I'm going to hold the inside without touching the outside. I'm going to try to get within 1 inch of the lip. Go all the way in and out, nice and quick. Again, try to hold it until your glaze is dried a little bit, but at this point, if you set it down on the base, you're going to be cleaning the glaze off of the base anyways. Once the outside is dry, then you'll be able to turn it upside down and dip the lip. Again, go back to your directions, check your directions, and make sure that you're using the right glaze. Re-stir, check your thickness again, and then you're going to hold it upside down and dip the lip. Nice and even if you can. Again, flipping it right side up too soon can make it drip down the side. If you can't pour the inside, dip the outside, and dip the lip because you just can't hold it to do that, or because you think it would look better to dip 3/4 with an overlap, you can use that technique. Think about where you want the overlap to be, what angle you might want it to be on, so that it works with your piece. I have my directions. I've carried my glazes over and stirred them, checking them for good thickness, making sure the holes pop on the spoon. So now I'm ready to glaze. My directions tell me to dip the 3/4 in the Atlantis Aqua first, so I'm going to go with that. I stir, get my spoon out of the way, and then I'm going to hold this so that I get the inside and outside approximately 3/4 of the way up. As I come out, I want to come upside down so that all the glaze drains out and it's not in contact with the bisqueware too long. I need to wait for all the glaze to dry before I can dip it in the second glaze. Always make sure your glazes, as you continue to glaze, are still stirred. Good consistency, then you can dip. Remember to still come out and upside down so that you're draining the glaze. Once the glaze is dry enough that I can set it down, I'll wait for it to dry so that I can clean up the bottom. One of the more advanced techniques in glazing is you can dip half, and dip half a third time. And by doing that, you end up with 3 areas that have the glaze that you picked and 3 areas that you have overlaps. It can be kind of interesting on very open forms like the bowl. So you want to pick 3 glazes that coordinate with each other well. And then you'll just decide which one should go first, second, and third. Again, we stir the glaze, check its consistency, and we dip literally about halfway in sideways. When we come out, it's like the dip 3/4 where we come out upside down and allow the glaze to dry. We need that glaze to dry so that we can dip the next 2 glazes. When you go to dip the second glaze, and this might be the trickiest part, is you need to dip the bottom half, but you need to figure out what the bottom half is so that you're covering approximately 1/3 of the glaze that you did just dip. Okay? Once you figure that out and you know where to hold it, then you can re-stir, get the spoon out of the way, and glaze that half. Even though it can be a little nerve-wracking, it's always important that you make sure you get half of the dip, or half of the pot dipped, so that you get nice, even coats. Again, you'll want that glaze to dry before you dip in the last glaze. Now when we dip this half, we're going to center the space that does not have glaze on it. And we're going to check the inside center, the very base of the pot, to make sure that if we go halfway, we are definitely going to cover everything, because we don't want to leave a spot in the bottom that doesn't have glaze on it. I've been able to cover the center so far, so this shouldn't be a problem. My second glaze is dry, so now I'm just going to make sure that this third glaze is still stirred up. Remember, when glazes sit for a little bit of time, it's important to re-stir all the chunks and everything up. Center that open spot, nice on the bottom. Hold it from the other side. Dip about halfway in and come up. Again, you're going to want to make sure that everything is dry before you flip it right side up, and then we'll be able to turf. Once you've finished your glazing and your glazing has dried, then you want to turf your pot, which is to remove all the glaze off the bottom using AstroTurf. Now this turf is in a tray, so it's a little bit wet, and it's already been used to turf this pot. So we want to make sure that we don't contaminate our pot by using that area. So we'll go over here. I don't want to touch the lip because I don't want the glaze to come off the lip. And I want to be very careful that the hand that touches the pot stays dry. The water and the scrubbing of the turf will help remove the glaze, and I don't want to tip it up and have the water come down the side of the pot. When you're turfing or cleaning up the bottoms of your cylinders or any pots from the potter's wheel, most of the time you have a bevel on the bottom, so you know that if your glaze is off the entire bottom and up the bevel, you have a nice clean edge. And you can use an elephant ear sponge to wipe that up so that you have a nice even edge. When you're working with a pinch pot, you'll still scrub on the turf, clean up the water before it drips, and then finish up your cleanup with your elephant ear sponge. But you may need to get down at eye level with the pot to just check to make sure that there's a little bit of space between the counter and where your glaze stops. When you go to turf a bowl, you definitely want to get all the glaze out of the inside, and the turf won't usually get that. You'll have to use the sponge. But the turf should clean up a nice clean edge down here on the bottom and up a little bit on the side if you have a curve or a bevel. Now you can check it like you did with the pinch pot, or you can use a cleanup tool, a sponge, and get all the glaze off of the entire foot ring if that's the preference that you have. As long as the glaze isn't going to run down and attach the pot to the kiln shelf, then you're going to be okay. So always make sure you check the bottoms of your pots before you turn them in. Now you'll have a glazed pot and you're all done.